Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 9, Dynamics of Interpersonal Communication. I wanted to start this lecture with this brief quote. And this quote reads, "Communication not only reflects romantic relationships, it also defines them." So we will be looking at why we form relationships, specifically looking at appearances, similarities, complementarity, proxemics, and disclosure. And then various models of relational dynamics and communication, specifically Mark Knapp's relational development model and Baxter's and Montgomery's dialectical perspectives. And lastly, we will communicate about relationships. So why do we form relationships? Well, essentially, if we reflect back on Chapter 1, we form relationships to fulfill our physical needs, identity needs, social needs, and practical needs. So what are relationships? Well, we could look at social relationships, which are based on general societal roles rather than unique individual identities. So think about your classmates or your coworkers or people you just interact on an everyday basis. These are conceptualized as social relationships. Like you can replace these people fairly easily. Personal close relationships, however, are categorized by a unique bond created between two people that defines their connection and the relationship. So two distinguishing factors include uniqueness and commitment. That uniqueness is that irreplaceability. So these people are special. We can't replace them very easily in our lives. And then also commitment, the emotional investment that we put forth into these relationships. So one of the first reasons why we initiate relationships is based on appearances. Now, appearances are important in early stages of relationship formation, but become less with time. In fact, we see that long-term relational partners often create a positive illusion or view each other as more attractive over time. So while our physical appearances might decrease over our lifespan, we see that long-term satisfied relational couples tend to view their partner as more attractive with time, because they might see other qualities as more attractive than just based on physical appearance. The reason why physical appearance is important at early stages of relationships is because they have the potential to influence secondary impressions. So we see that first impressions influence secondary impressions. And this stems from a concept we learned in Chapter 4 with perception, and that is the halo effect. And to illustrate this, the second or that last point is that both men and women judge perceived attractiveness with positive characteristics. And those include kindness, sexual warmth, responsiveness, poise, sociability, and perceived sensitivity. And so this is well-documented research suggesting that appearance does play an important role at the onset of any relationship. However, if we continue to explore some of the motivations and reasons why we form relationships, the similarity thesis tends to be the strongest supported determining factor of relationship formation. And essentially, that is when two people seek out similarities in each other. And so if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice two flamingos. And a saying that helps us understand this, that we often say in communication studies, is birds of the same feather flock together. And so this really points to that human condition where we seek out individuals who are similar to us. And by doing that, that essentially validates our own self-construct. It also reduces uncertainty. And so if you meet someone new for the first time and you share all these similar interests or beliefs or values, then you can assume that this person is like you in some meaningful way. This also could be tied to self-fulfilling prophecies and how our assumptions of similarities influence our thoughts, liking, and also behavior, making that end result, a relationship, more likely to occur. Another reason why we form relationships is based on complementarity. And so we seek out people that complement us in some sort of meaningful way. And this is equivalent to that opposites attract. So satisfied couples are similar enough to satisfy their basic needs, but also different enough to be interesting. And so we see that similar preferences with role performance and leisure activities, these individuals tend to be more compatible. An example of complementarity is this dominant and passive relationship dynamic we often see. So the dominant person needs some sort of passive person to follow them, but the passive person probably needs someone who's more dominant to take the leadership and control of that relationship. Another reason why we form relationships is because we get certain rewards from those relationships. And this is based on the social exchange theory, which is based on a simplistic economic principle. And that is, we seek out relationships that gives us more rewards than costs. So some type of rewards we get for being in a relationship include extrinsic rewards. These are external advantages such as social status, professional connections. It could be instrumental rewards such as resources and favors. So it's easier to save money. It's easier to complete tasks around the house, or it's easier to access support in a relationship. And then intrinsic rewards. These are like personally satisfying rewards. They're more abstract, such as intimacy, connection, emotional support, all of those things. So looking further into this social exchange theory, we see that in order for relationships to be satisfying, the rewards minus the cost equals the outcome. And so, the rewards have to outweigh the costs of being in that relationship. So think of, this first example right here. So let's say the rewards is in high intimacy, but one of the costs of being in a relationship with this person is slightly messy. They don't pick up after themselves. They leave their dirty dishes in the sink, right? So we would look at this relationship and say, okay, well, I feel a strong emotional connection with this person, and that outweighs kind of their behavior or their messiness. And that would lead to, again, a satisfaction relationship, is because that reward outweighs the cost. However, if we see in the second example, let's say there's low affection in a relationship, but the cost of being in this relationship includes a lot of criticism, then we could look at this dynamic and say, well, the costs now outweigh the rewards, and that is when people start to experience low satisfaction in the relationships. And so this is pointing to this comparison level, and this is essentially the minimum standard of what behavior is acceptable in a relationship. And so we all have this kind of comparison level going into a relationship, what's acceptable and what's not. And if the other person's behavior dips below that comparison level, then we could start engaging in this comparison level of alternatives. And so that is essentially the standard that compares the rewards one receives in their current relationship to what could be expected in another situation. So while we do this subconsciously, I think it's really important to be careful of engaging in this type of thinking, especially when evaluating our relationships. Primarily because when we engage in that comparison level of alternatives, we start to undermine the trust and the emotional connection we have in our current relationship. So rather than focusing on the problem and trying to work towards enhancing that relationship, a lot of people just start thinking about, the possibilities of being in another relationship. It goes back to that old saying, like, the grass is greener on the other side, right? Well, that used to be some sort of conventional wisdom that, anything outside of our context is going to look attractive. But the grass is always greener where we water it. And so, yeah, sometimes through the course of our relationships, the costs might outweigh the rewards. And that just means that maybe we need to nurture our relationship. Maybe we need to do some work and, work on that relationship. This also points to another theory called equity theory. And this is the evaluation of relationships based on input versus output into the relationship. And so equity is when we have equal input into that relationship. And by virtue of that, both people are going to access those rewards. Negative inequity is when essentially we're putting in more work into a relationship than the other person. And so we're putting in all this work, but we aren't getting any rewards from this relationship. Positive inequity is when we're putting in very little work, but we're receiving all of these rewards. And so we could look at, relationships from this perspective. Are both people committed to the relationship? Are they actively contributing to the betterment of that relationship? Now, of course, it's easy to look at relationships from the outside and say, oh, there's negative inequity or there's positive inequity going on. But as a couple, we really have to define what is equal input and output. So, oftentimes we see that people or couples will assign tasks such as, okay, I'll do the dishes, but you do the laundry. Now, there might be more dishes than laundry or more laundry than dishes to be done. But as long as the couple has defined those terms of what looks equal in that relationship, then that's going to be okay. Essentially, we want to strive for that equity in relationships where both people feel valued and appreciated for the work that they pour into their relationship. So another reason why we form relationships is based on competence. So we like to be around talented people in hopes that they will rub off on us. So this is a picture of some of my friends from graduate school at Cal State Fullerton. And one of the reasons why I developed these friendships is because of that competence. These were very smart people, very professional people, and I saw value in that friendship is because these individuals would help me grow in my intelligence and professionalism. This is Jackie. Jackie and myself, we would take a lot of classes together, and when there was some sort of group work or team project, we would always pair up, is because we worked really well together, and we appreciated each other's level of competence that we brought into that dynamic. This right here is Sasha, who is an international student from Russia, and we grew really close in our intercultural communication seminar, is because her research looked at this symbolic convergence theory and coordinated management of meaning theory. I think I talked about that theory in chapter 5. But essentially, her research was to build bridges between nations, through diplomacy. And that is something that I found really intriguing. And so we would just spend countless hours talking about, these broad theoretical constructs. And, I really valued our conversations. So again, the reasons why we sometimes develop relationships is because we see that the individual has some sort of competency that we could learn and benefit from. Conventionally, proximity was another important factor on why we form relationships. And so this is essentially based on proxemics, or the spatial and temporal boundaries that surround us. So we develop relationships with people who are close to us, right? So, traditionally this would be, we would seek out a relationship with someone in the same village, or maybe we would seek out a relationship with the family down the street. Now in today's context, with mediated technologies, we can transcend those spatial and temporal boundaries that used to put limitations or constrained our mate selection or relationships based on the physical and social context. Like, we can transcend that, and now, with apps and technology, we can initiate relationships with people who are, thousands of miles away. However, some of this does still hold value today. So we still interact with similar people, and this could include age, socioeconomic status, educational level, and so forth. And typically we initiate this relationship based on the homogeneity of our surroundings. So people who are similar to us within that same proximity. I think personally, a reason why we formulate relationships is based on self-disclosure. And of course, we've already looked at self-disclosure, and this is the event of sharing personal private information with another person. And by virtue of that, that enhances attraction and a sense of support. It also suggests trust. So sharing and receiving important personal information, giving and taking, is a form of establishing trust in a relationship. And so, if we share something personal with someone and they don't value that information, or they disregard it, or they don't protect it or keep it safe, then I would argue that that relationship probably ends pretty quickly. So, we look at relationships in terms of, can I be completely honest and open with this person, and will I be supported and accepted, after I shared this private information. So this becomes more important as the relationship progresses. And I think a key distinguishing factor is reciprocity. And so if I were to share some private information with you, do you, again, protect that information? Do you appreciate it? Do you validate it? And do you open up and share, private information with me, information on a similar depth? So that is essentially that reciprocity. And I would argue that even though this dynamic changes over a course of a relationship, it's really important to find that reciprocity, is because non-reciprocity, I think, leads to an imbalance in the relationship. If someone is always the one sharing, but the other person isn't sharing anything at all, then of course that becomes an imbalanced dynamic. So some other forms of attraction, or things that attract us to other people in terms of initiating relationships, include social attraction. And this is essentially when we're attracted to our friends or social groups. So think about, why are you attracted to a particular social group or particular friend, right? What grabbed your attention? What attracted you to them? We could also see that task attraction. Sometimes we're attracted to people or initiate relationships simply based on the desire to work with someone or something. And so I mentioned, my friend from grad school, Jackie. Like, I think we had this mutual task attraction. Like, we knew that we could work really well together on completing our tasks and our assignments. And that's what drew us together. We could also see physical attraction, such as sexual attraction, chemistry, and then also intellectual attraction, such as that competence. So we see that we're attracted to different people for various different reasons. And those could include social attraction, task attraction, physical attraction, or intellectual attraction. So let's go ahead and take a look at how relationships develop and the maintenance. So we spent this first section just talking about the reasons why we form relationships. But now we're going to get into how relationships develop. Specifically, we're going to look at Mark Knapp's relational development model. And these, according to Mark Knapp, there are 5 stages, systematic steps in how a relationship progresses, and 5 systematic steps of relationship dissolution, or when relationships come apart. And so even though this is an outdated model, there's better theories that explains, how relationships come together and how relationships come apart. This is still a good foundation to conceptualizing the process of relationship development and dissolution. So we're still going to use it, and obviously it's in the textbook as well. So there are 5 stages of coming together, and if we start here, the very first stage is initiating. The second stage is experimenting. The third stage is intensifying. The fourth stage is integrating, and that 5th stage is bonding. So these are the 5 stages of coming together. I'll go through each one of these stages separately. The stages of coming together, the very first one that we see is differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and that last stage is terminating. So let's go ahead and take a look at that very first stage of coming together, and that is initiating. Essentially, we see that the communication taking place in this stage is simply communicating interest in another person. The interactions tend to be brief. They follow conversational formulas, related to self-disclosure and social norms, right? So it might be a brief conversation like, hey, what's your name? You might high five or shake a hand or some sort of formal greeting. You might ask some basic information, talk about the weather. It's very basic. The cool thing is with social media, it allows us to engage in this initiating process much easier. And so this helps introverted individuals engage in relationship formation. So let's say everything goes well in that initiating stage. The second step is this experimenting. This is where we focus on reducing uncertainty, right? Because we don't have a lot of information about this person. We try to reduce that uncertainty by getting to know the other person through small talk. And so small talk serves 2 basic functions. It allows discovery of similarities, and it helps us decide if this relationship is worth pursuing, right? So you might start talking to someone and ask them like, hey, what's your favorite music? Do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? And you notice that they're just complete opposite to you. There's no chemistry or there's no reciprocity. Then that small talk would help you determine that, okay, I'm not going to put in the work and effort in, trying to develop this relationship. Let's say everything goes well in that stage. Then we move into this intensifying stage. This is where our stronger feelings are expressed. So we see that oftentimes there's an exchange in favors. People start to give each other tokens of affection. This could be verbal or nonverbal. We see flirting, we see nicknames, and this is surrounded by just euphoria. The butterflies and the excitement of developing a relationship. Keep in mind, Mark Knapp's relational development model also applies to friendships. And so in intensifying friendships, even though we might not see flirting or this, euphoria, we might see this exchange in favors or even the tokens of affection through affirmation or hanging out or validation. We might see nicknames, with best friends. So don't think that this only applies to romantic relationships, but it could also apply to friendships as well. We also see the fourth step is integrating. And this is when the couple or the two people identify as a social unit or they experience some sort of shared identity. So we see that family introductions are part of this integrating stage. And this is where we see that relational uncertainty is at its lowest. Essentially, people are defining their relationship. They're saying we're exclusive or we're dependent on each other. After the integrating stage, we move to this bonding. And this is essentially where symbolic gestures are exchanged that show long-term commitment within the relationship. So this could be promise rings, marriage, life partners, a civil union, and so forth. So the bonding is just whatever that couple decides is symbolic to their relationship to illustrate long-term commitment to that relationship. So we see that relational maintenance is this large bubble that includes these four categories. The last two stages of coming together and the first two stages of coming apart is because we just don't get to this bonding stage and live happily ever after. Like relationships are messy, they're dynamic, and they're constantly evolving. And so even though we might get to this bonding stage, there will be moments in our relationships where we start to drift apart or we start to decrease communication, or we might have some issues that we need to work on. And so this relational maintenance, most of your long-term relationships will bounce back and forth between these. So let's say a married couple, in their first year of that partnership, they have a huge falling out, like a big disagreement. So they start focusing on themselves, they start decreasing their communication. And then they realize, like, we can't be doing this. And so then they go back to this integrating stage where they actively start identifying themselves as a social unit and start working on their partnership. And then they might get back to this bonding stage or redevelop those symbolic gestures of commitment to their partner, and later on in life, they might experience, that same pattern. So this is where most long-term relationships reside in, this relational maintenance category. But let's say this relationship is coming apart. And so let's take a look at these 5 stages of coming apart. The first stage of coming apart is differentiating. During this stage, differences between the relationship partners are emphasized. So instead of looking at the relationship as a social unit or as a team, they start to focus on their partner's behavior and the differences between the two people. So we see that partners become more individualistic in their relationship. So we shifts to me. So we tend to focus more on ourselves rather than our partner or the partnership. And it's not a matter of just focusing on the differences, because even in a healthy, satisfying relationship, there could be differences. But we tend to look at these differences from a negative perspective. The second stage of coming apart is this circumscribing. And this is where we decrease communication in terms of frequency and duration. So communication is limited to safe topics. We see that people start to shrink the interest in each other. The expression of affection and commitment also decreases within this stage. Stagnating is when the relationships become inactive. Essentially, both parties minimize the input into their relationship. So even, if we look back at that equity theory, it's very minimal effort that both people are putting into the relationship. There's no exchange in rewards because they aren't putting the work into the relationship. So these relationships are just in existence, but they lack fulfillment. Now, if that continues, we see this avoiding stage. And this is where individuals create physical or emotional distance within their relationship. So people in relationship become separated. This could be either physically, emotionally, or mentally. both people begin to avoid the other person's needs and slowly start to focus on themselves. So this includes various types of separation. There could be avoidance. This is preventing or reducing interactions. It could be disengagement, which is hiding information, interaction in a less personal manner. So hiding information, interacting in a less personal manner. Or it could be cognitive disassociation. And this is disregarding messages and showing cognitive or emotional detachment. So this is where partners disassociate themselves from their partner emotionally and so forth. And then, of course, if that persists, we get to this last stage, which is terminating. So this is when both people decide to terminate their relationship. So those are the 5 stages of coming together and 5 stages coming apart. Now, this is not included in the textbook, the Duck's model of dissolution, but I wanted to give you an alternative way of viewing relationship dissolution, or that process of how relationship comes apart. And so according to Duck, the very first stage is actually an intrapsychic phase. And this is when individuals start to evaluate the relationship and provides internal justification for ending the relationship. So before the other partner knows it, the relationship starts ending the moment people start thinking about or justifying reasons for ending that relationship. Then the second stage is this dyadic stage, when individuals talk to their partners about their decisions of ending the relationship. So this is maybe the breakup. The third stage is the social phase. So even though that you break up with this person, now you have to face your social networks. Everyone's going to be asking, like, why did you break up? You were perfect together. What happened? And so the social phase includes individuals creating narratives or stories to tell their friends and families. And so sometimes we do this in a way that saves face. So that's that third stage, that social phase. And then the fourth stage is that grave dressing phase. And this is when we focus on ending the relationship or engage in coping behaviors to move past that grief. So again, there's an alternative perspective on relationship dissolution. So, with Mark Knapp's relational development model, the 5 stages coming together and 5 stages coming apart, it's a very linear model, so it kind of looks like this pattern 1. But we see that, again, that's very linear. It doesn't take into consideration the dynamics of relationships or the complexities of relationship development. So, these other patterns illustrate different ups and downs that we might experience in relationship. Okay, so moving forward, let's take a look at the major dialectical tensions that we will experience in any relationship. So this is Baxter's typology of dialectical tension. So think about dialectical tensions as 2 points on a continuum, the very opposite ends of a continuum, that coexist in our life, but we strive to balance, find a balance between these 2 ends or points in a continuum. So think about the first one, and this is the dialectic associated with integration and separation. And so as humans, we are social creatures. We thrive when we are connected to other people. But if we are connected to the point that we lose our sense of personal identity, then we don't thrive. We deprive ourselves of our individualism. And so where do we find the balance between being connected to other people and also maintaining our a sense of personal identity? And so this is that first dialectical tension. Now, Baxter breaks up all of these dialectical tensions into internal and external tensions. So internal tensions are tensions we experience in our interpersonal close relationship. And then the external tensions are the tensions that as a couple we face from outside factors. And so within your relationship, you're going to experience these internal dialectical tensions. But as a social unit, you're going to also experience tensions between you as a couple and, let's say, your family or workplace or society on a larger scale. So for the sake of this class, I'm only going to hold you accountable for knowing the internal dialectical tensions, but I'll explain both of them. So let's take a look at this first one, integration, separation. Essentially, within any relationship, we have tensions between how much we want to feel connected to the other person and how much autonomy or personal freedom we have in that relationship. And each person has different preferences. So one person might have a stronger need to feel connected rather than have their personal freedoms, whereas someone else might have a stronger need to maintain their personal freedom or their autonomy, and they might have a low need for connection. So a couple they're going to have to navigate some of those tensions, figuring out where's the balance between these two people. Now, as a couple, they're going to experience these tensions, but with how associated with inclusion and seclusion. So how much do they want external factors such as extended family, their mother-in-law or society to be a part of their relationship? And to what extent do they want to maintain their privacy from external factors? The second dialectical tension is associated with stability and change. And so in our humanity, in our human life, we strive for stability, is because stability gives us a peace of mind. The thing is, too much stability and predictability can be extremely boring, right? So if you're caught in the same old routine, like you can predict what you're going to be doing this time next week. If we have too much stability, we lose out on kind of the joys and unexpected ventures in life. And so this internal dialectical tension is associated with this predictability and novelty. It's important to have that predictability within a relationship, to be able to predict our partner's behavior. But if we get to a point in the relationship where we can predict every single thing about our partner, then it's like the mystery of learning about our partner is not there. So how do we balance between predictability and novelty? The thing is, if we have too much novelty or spontaneity or change, we can't keep up. So rapid change very quickly, that's constant, like in environments that are constantly changing, that causes a lot of anxiety. We can't predict the future. And so that could be very dangerous for a relationship as well. And so we try to find the balance between these two. Again, with the external dialectical tensions associated with stability and change, we get this conventionality and uniqueness. So how conventional do we want our relationship to be, or how unique do we want our relationship to be? And where's the balance between that? Okay, this last dialectical tension is associated with expression and privacy. So on one end, we feel the strong need to express ourselves, but at the other end, we feel that same need to keep ourselves private, our self-expression private. And so again, we engage in this dialectical tension, trying to figure out where's that balance. So for the internal tensions, we see openness and closeness, and then the external tensions associated with revelation and concealment. So how open should I be with my partner, and how much privacy do I want within the relationship? And then as a couple, it's like, how much do we communicate to the outside world of what's going on in a relationship, or how much do we want to conceal from the outside world. So, when relationships are developing, a lot of times we experience these tensions as we get to know or develop a relationship, and trying to figure out where's the balance point is because, again, two people engaged in a relationship are going to have different preferences when it comes to integration, separation, stability and change, and expression and privacy. So I just talked about these. So how do we manage dialectical tensions? Well, denial, I think a lot of people engage in this. And this is where they just choose one end of the spectrum and ignore the other. So they choose their predominant preference and just ignore the other needs that we have. Disorientation, this is feeling overwhelmed and respond by fighting, freezing, or leaving the relationship. Alteration, choosing one end or the other at different times. So alteration is altering between these the ends in a continuum at different points. Segmentation, this is compartmentalizing parts of the relationship. So we share feelings about friends, but not about past relationships. So it's essentially putting boundaries on when is it okay to engage in one dialectical tension over the other. So balance, recognizing that there's needs for balance and engage in compromise. So this is, as a couple, you're trying to figure out the balance between these tensions. Integration, both sides are important. So this is where we recognize that, again, predictability is really important, but also having some sort of spontaneous adventure in that relationship is also really important. And so we could use this integration and schedule a time or schedule in a time where we could be more spontaneous, but also keep maybe our predictability and our work schedules still there. So this, is being more creative in integrating both sides. Recalibration, this is reframing to dissolve the contradiction. So we could engage in this cognitive modification. So for some of us, like I'll use myself as an example. Like I like predictability. Like I like to plan out my schedule. I am not a very spontaneous person. And so when friends call me up and they're like, hey, you want to go on a road trip tomorrow? And I'm just like I need all the details. I like to predict things. So it's kind of hard for me to break out of my routine. So one thing that I could do is by recalibrating or, this cognitive modification is really challenge myself. Why is it that I like predictability? Is it because of the uncertainty? Like, does that cause anxiety? And try reworking some of those emotions I experience with spontaneity in order to engage in that behavior and appreciate it for what it is. Reaffirmation, this is embrace, accept the tensions because they'll always exist in a relationship. And just go along with the ride. So essentially, if we look at those two last points, recalibration and reaffirmation, essentially those are kind of what we did in chapter 8 with reappraisals, reassessing the situations and trying to find the positives in those situations. So we see that relationships are constantly changing. They're affected by culture and the communication by individuals within the relationship. And so no matter what relationship we're engaged in, it's always going to require some sort of maintenance. Some key things for relational maintenance should include positivity, openness, assurance, relying on social networks such as friends and family and trusted people to help us through difficult times in our relationships. And then also sharing tasks, making sure that both people in that relationship are putting equal work into that relationship. Now, of course, there's going to be moments in our relationship where we'll experience relational transgressions. This is when one partner violates the explicit or implicit terms of a relationship, letting the other person down in an important way or hurting someone's feelings. So these could be distinguished by minor versus significant. So in our everyday, just behaviors, we might engage in a relational transgression that is of minor offense, such as not doing the dishes when we promise to do them, or it could be significant, like cheating on a partner. It could be social or relational. It could be deliberate, or it could be unintentional. It could be one-time or incremental. It could be just a one-time offense, or it could be something that's systematically happening. So, for example, personality differences. We see that couples get into this gridlock is because there are some conflicts or things that we can't fix. There is no solution for it. So it's like this might be an ongoing issue within a relationship. So it's like, how do we deal with that? How do we create a positive environment through our communication that allows us to address this issue that's going to continue throughout the duration of the relationship? So the last little bit of the chapter looks at strategies for relational repair. I think communication is extremely important. With chapter 8 with talking about our emotions, I mentioned that, it's really important to create an environment that's supportive for that conversation. Similarly, when we're addressing strategies or communication to repair our relationships, it's really important to create an environment that is conducive for some sort of effective result of that conversation. So really communicate with a partner. I think forgiveness is so important in any relationship. Being able to engage in that forgiveness and let go of that resentment so that so as a couple, these individuals can start working on moving forward in the relationship. So what goes into forgiveness? Well, there should be an apology. There should be some sort of acknowledgement of wrong doing. There should be sincerity in, making amends and putting in effort, trying to avoid that situation again. And then some sort of compensation. So there's, on the right-hand side, this 4-part apology. And so the first part is the apology. The second part is taking responsibility. The third step is how will this be resolved? And the fourth step of an apology is asking for forgiveness. So that is something that, again, you could start implementing into your everyday lives. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm not perfect. There's moments where I offend, I hurt people's feelings, I say things that I shouldn't do within my relationships, and I have to apologize. That's part of being human. And so really take responsibility of that, is because when you can take responsibility and really communicate to your friends and your partner and the important people in your lives, that's going to grow that relationship deeper. I know it's scary. I know it's completely vulnerable to do that, but it's the best way we can get over some of the issues, is to address them full on. And again, if people can't appreciate that, if they can't accept the apology, if they can't, accept your attempt for repairing that relationship or for whatever you did, then I would seriously consider, how important that relationship is to you. So in chapter 9, I know we talked a lot about a lot of interesting information. So real briefly, some of the key things that we talked about is why we form relationships, specifically the appearance, similarity, complementarity, proximity, and disclosure. We also looked at the models of relational dynamics in communication, specifically Knapp's relational development model and the 5 stages of coming together and 5 stages of coming apart. We also looked at Baxter's dialectical tensions. And then we also looked at maintaining and supporting relationships, repairing damaging relationships through the use of apologies. So thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you next time.